Hello everyone and welcome, TMM here. I'm making a tutorial video series on how to make a law-friendly car for GTA 4 from scratch. As always, put on your own favorite music and enjoy the video. Today, in the third part of the series, we'll start adding details to the car. So just like before, a few notes. Number 1. So while modeling, to check if the model has some disjoints or duplicates or like interfaces or vertices where they are in the same place but not connected. This can be done by selecting the car in object mode, right-click, shade smooth. Using the metal car paint matcap will also make the dupes more visible. If you see any sort of a defect where the surface area isn't smooth, you can select the area in wireframe mode, press M, and then merge by distance. This process can be done for the whole car as well by selecting all vertices before merging. If the problem still persists, try to move the disjointed vertices or face to the correct location and try again. About the polygon count, for GTA 4, a complete game-ready car has usually around 14 to 20,000 polygons, depending on the type of the car or if there are any like extra parts, like props or like tuning parts. However, once the model is done in Blender stage of this tutorial series, the total polygon count of the car will be usually half of the game-ready model's polygon count. Basically, try to keep the polygon count under 10,000 for now. For example, the Gallant Idaho I made has 14,000 final polygon count, whereas this model, which is before the Blender export, has around 7,500 polygons. To check the polygon count, go to the object mode, hide any other objects in the scene, then look at the status bar on the bottom right. If the bar is empty, right-click the bar and select Scene Statistics, and then look for the thrice count. That's our polygon count. The one very useful tool that we will use in the video is the bevel tool. It's usually used where there are sharp corners. You can look around in OpenIV to see the examples of where it's usually used. To add the bevels, select the edges and then Ctrl B, then play around the settings to get it to the correct shape, and then click anywhere else to apply it. And these are the examples of where I used the bevel tool. So there are a few things that can be borrowed later from a vanilla GTA 4 car. Things like mirrors, license plates, engine, interior, parts under the body, and other things that can be detached from a GTA 4 car and then attached to our car. The order in which you add the detail doesn't really matter much. The order of the details that I add to my car is purely my preference. You can start anywhere first. For me, I usually start from the front grille, and then to the lower part of the front, like the front bumper, and then to the back of the car, and then back up again to the upper parts, and then to the hood at the front. So the footage I include in this video may be out of order. You will see some parts of the car appear and disappear later. I apologize for any confusions this may cause, because I tend to forget some things while making the model, or maybe I had to change some parts of the design later. Now, the adding details of this episode will be mostly the details outside of the car. Other things like the engine bay, interior, undercarriage, and a few other things will be added later in CMOD stage. Now this could be done in Blender as well by importing a GTA 4 car into Blender and borrow the parts. But since I'm more used to the process of CMOD, I will be doing it later there. I will also have to apologize to any car guys who are watching. I'm not very good with car terms since I'm not actually a car guy at all. I only know how to make car mods for a game, so yeah. And with all that being said, let's start adding the details to our car. So as I said before, I'll start with the front bumper. My car has a gap in the trim that the license plate will be mounted to. So I'll cut the trim out in the middle and the front, and then I'll fill it up with like a flat surface. My bumper has a vent in the middle, in the bottom, so I'll add one. Now, since the trim on my bumper and extending to the rear bumper looks too flat, I'll add a gap in the middle of the trim, which is like a detail to the trim. This is essentially done by creating loop cuts and then extruding inwards to the middle of the car. Adding a trim, like a chrome trim around my mod Villa Elegant like this, is basically the same process, but by extruding outside of the car instead of inside of the car. Now, since the angle here is too sharp, I'll add the bevel to the edges, and then I'll do some touch up at the front bumper vent and also where the front plate will be attached to. Here, I add some fog lights to the middle of the trim of the front bumper, right here. Now, lights in this game is more detailed than the ones in San Andreas. It's not completely flat and rectangular in most cases, so I extrude it forward and I resize the front face. And after that, I add bevels on the corners of the edges, and then do some touch-ups of my own. Now, on to the other front parts. I'll start with adding the grille. This grille will be meshed, so I'll leave the surface flat, with a chrome trim surrounding it. In the middle, there will be a divider where the badge will be attached to, but the badges will be added later. Once I finished the grille, I moved on to the headlights. As I said, it's not completely flat, so I'll give it some kind of curvy, protruding surface. And here is where I did the bumper a little bit to match a grill shape. I also manually added the bevels here. To mimic the effect of a hood that has a split in the middle like this car, you can add a small edge loop at the center of the hood, like I did here. After I finish those front parts, I move on to the wheel arches. I'll start with the front one. I used vertex slide and subdivide tools to create the edges for the wheel arch. And then I add some details to the three-man skirts. Same process is applied to the rear arch. Now, Rockstar had a specific way of making the wheel arch for cars where they add loops around the wheel arches. Now, I may have forgot about it while working on the model, so here's a footage of me adding the loops to the model much later. Now moving on to the rear bumper, I start with the same as the front bumper with a trim cap for the license plate. And then I added the lights on the trim again. After that, I add the gaps on the skirt for the exhaust. Now, if the car only had one exhaust hole on one side, I don't do this now, but way later after finishing all of the blender stage, where the mirror modifier will be applied. After the rear bumper is done, it's time to create the rear lights. Once again, the process entirely depends on what design you chose. And for my car, I start with adding the outer trim. And then I add the bevels on the corner of the lights to give it a curvy look. And then I add the lights. Pretty much the same process as the front ones. Now, since my car doesn't need any modification for the trunk lid, there won't be a section on this video. Now, if your car has, it's not correct design yet, you should edit it now. And so I moved on to the rear window, where I started by adding the trims and bevels around the corner like before. And then I extrude the innermost edges of the trims into the interior. This will be where the window glass sit. After that, I create a glass window by connecting the top vertices to the bottom, creating faces. The shape of the window glass doesn't have to completely match the shape of the windows itself. It can just be made out of rectangulars, and then have its corner vertices move so that it's not any gap from the interior to the outside. And then I add the loop cuts to match the C-pillar, and then snap the vertices onto the trims. After the glass is finished, detach the glass and then move the glass inwards along the faces that we extruded into the interior earlier, by around like 40%. Well, it's 40% because in GTA 4 the window glasses have 2 layers, which we will copy out the outer layer and move the inwards like much later in the process. Not this video. Now onto the front window, which is basically the same process as the rear one. Now to the doors. I start by adding the trims around the windows just like before, once again. After that, I created the place where the side mirror will be mounted, and then the B pillar, and also the rear window pillar. And then once again, I extruded the edges into the interior for the window glasses. Once the faces are created, I create the window glass. The process is the same as before. Now, this is specific to my car. The side trims are too large for the door to be able to be opened, so I had to make some kind of gap in the trims. Now, this step can be skipped if your door handles you choose are available on one of the GTA 4 cars, where it can be borrowed later. Say like an older car like my Gallant Idaho, which I took the door handles from the Banana. But since the door handles are like this, I had to edit the door faces to add in the handles. Now the front door has a keyhole, of course it does. So I add the keyhole. Now the keyhole in GTA 4 is simply a chrome textured 5-sided pyramid. So I just create a new pyramid, change the settings, resize and move the said pyramid into the location. Don't forget to remove the bottom face as well, as we don't need that. As we move on, we reach the hood. Now my car doesn't really need any modifications to the hood anymore, so all I need to add to my hood was just some bevels here. It depends on your car, of course. You may need to add like vent holes or something like that. Now onto the final piece of this episode, the panel gaps. Panel gaps in GTA 4 is simply made by adding small loop cuts where each panels of the cars meet. The panels of the car is defined by the car's hierarchy, which you can look around in OpenIV to see examples of car hierarchies. And here is where I added panel gaps for my car, in these pictures right here. To create the panel gaps, you can start by detaching a panel, like say the hood. Then use the measure tool from the outer edges of the panel. Measure around 0.003 meters. And then add a loop cut. After the loop cut is applied, use vertex slide by using Shift V and then press E and then F. This is to make sure that the edges will be clamped on one of the outer edges. And then slide the edges until it touches our measurement we made earlier. Then apply the loop cut. In some cases, cutting the faces is not very favorable. Like for example, where this trunk lid meets the rear light, the trims. A workaround this problem is to loop cut the trunk lid by 0.006 meters. And do the process I explained earlier. When the loop cuts meet on the corner of the panel, just turn the loops into a quad junction, or whatever it's called, I don't exactly know this. And then add another loop cut in the middle of what we've just created. Once all of this is done, move the inner edges into the car by around 0.002 meters. The axis you move depend on the position of the panels. Say example the trunk. The rear facing edges need to be moved by minus 0.002 meters on the y-axis, whereas the top facing edges need to be moved around by minus 0.002 meters. Finally, we can reattach your panel back to the car itself. And remember to merge the duplicated vertices as well. Once again, and here is the end result of my car after we finish part 3 this episode. So now we have added the exterior details to our car. This process took me around 6 hours from the last video's model to get to the model as shown here. So coming up next video, we'll be doing the final touches in Blender and get some textures ready for Modeler. I hope this video was informative to everyone who watched, and remember to take frequent breaks while working on your car. It can be tiring. If this video has been helpful, please consider like and subscribing to my channel, which is currently related to GTA modding. If there's any questions regarding the tutorial, please leave them in the comments. Also, remember to check out my workshop for GTA mods, link in the description. So that's it for this episode. See you guys later on the next video. Thanks for watching.